It's lesson 4. Well, welcome to Intro to Web Programming. So our first lab was due last night, so I've received 32 of 38 submissions. I will start marking those either later today or by tomorrow. I have some time, bigger block of time tomorrow to do some grading. If you're one of the 6 people who haven't submitted, please make sure you submit today for a maximum mark of 80%. You do lose 20% per day that your submissions are late. So what are we doing today? We are going to go over assignment 1, which I'll give out shortly. And then we're going to take our PHP flicks and we're going to look at including validation, because right now users can basically give us any kind of data that they want. And they can submit movie data that's incomplete. So we're going to look at validating both on the server and on the client. We'll investigate why do we need to do both? Why can't we just do client-side validation? Seems to work. You probably did that in your HTML class last semester, but we'll look at why we also have to validate on the server. So that's going to be our first part of class. The second part of class is we are going to work with Git and GitHub. Some of you may have worked with Git and GitHub in your first semester, and some of you probably did not. Has anybody worked with Git and GitHub in any of your other classes, or is this totally new for you? Tyler, you have? Okay, Lena, not really. Viraj says yes. Hamid says no. Okay, so we're going to go over Git, and Pushpinder says yes. That's good. So it's new for some and not for others. If you've worked with Git some before, that's okay. So some of what I might say is somewhat repetitive, but Git is a critical skill that you need to master, and we're going to use it. Many of you, particularly if you're in the web program, we're going to have 4 courses together, and we're going to use Git in all of your courses. It's industry standard. It's something that employers will expect that you know. So we're going to include it, and moving forward, you're going to submit all of your assignments via Git and GitHub. So we'll look at that later today. So let's go over, I'm going to go over assignment 1, which is now posted. So you can find assignment 1 in the assignments and tests section on Blackboard. Here it is. But I'm going to go over the instructions, show you a sample project that I built, and make sure that everybody understands exactly what's expected of you. So the purpose of this assignment is to show that you can properly insert and select data from a database, as well as validate user inputs using PHP scripting. So basically the things we've been doing over the last 3 lessons, including today. Okay? It counts for 15% of your final grade. Please start early. So the assignment is not due for 2 weeks, or it's due in, I guess, 13 days, 13 and a half days, so on midnight. Okay. But please start early. Please remember, I don't work 7 days a week. I am a human, I have a family, so I was getting some requests from people yesterday for help with their lab, like Sunday night. So yes, I give you the weekend to do it, but I'm basically available. If you remember in the syllabus, the communication policy is you'll get a response typically within 24 hours, Monday to Friday. But if you email me over the weekend, you may not get a response until Monday, which is going to be too late to meet your Sunday night due date. So it's not that big of an assignment. You have to build 2 tables in your database and 3 PHP pages. So if you want help, I'm happy to give it, but start early so you can email me during the week or make an office hours appointment and we can have a live one-on-one session and I can help you. If you email Saturday or Sunday for tech support, the weekend that it's due, you may not get a reply. One other thing I've had to add to my assignments, which I hate to do, but I have been finding lately that students have been posting my assignment documents. Often I've been finding them. There's a couple of well-known websites where students like to post tests and assignments from their material. My documents, as well as your other instructors, they're copyright. You don't have permission to take and upload my files. So I check those sites regularly and I ask them to take down my documents, which they do. I had this conversation. Several students did it in December where they took assignments from other classes and posted them without my permission for other people on those sites. I'm not going to name them. Some of you have probably been on them. I do not want to see this document there. Okay, it's for you to do the assignment. It's not to be posted publicly on the internet. So your assignment's due midnight a week from Sunday. To submit, instead of uploading your code to Blackboard like you did for Lab 1, you are going to give me a link to a GitHub repository. You can call it Comp1006 AS1. It has to be private, so nobody can access it. And I'll go over this. You invite me, here is my GitHub username. You're going to get really familiar with it because you're going to submit all your assignments this way. So it stands for in front of the net, which is my company name. You add me, and that way I have access to it even though your repository is private. And I'll go over how to do this later. And then you will give me the URLs to your pages. You'll publish them to your AWS server. So you're basically just submitting links. You're not uploading any code. A link to your code repository that lives on the GitHub website, and then a link to your pages on AWS so I can try them in my browser. So this also allows me to mark quickly because I don't actually have to download and open a bunch of zip files. I can see your code online and I can try your pages out in my browser without all that download process, which makes grading slow. You must do your own assignment. You can't do it with somebody else or have someone do it for you or copy one you find on the internet. Okay. If you don't give me your own work, I cannot give you a grade. And lastly, if you give me an assignment that I have questions about or I'm concerned might not be your own work, then I will send you a meeting request and we'll have a live meeting and I'll ask you some questions to try and validate that in fact you did all the work yourself. Okay, so your grade is subject to a code review. You can use the file, so all the work I do in class, I'm publishing to GitHub. It's there as a reference for you. Okay, the idea is not to download it, to find and replace and give me back my own work and ask me to give you a mark for it. Okay, I've been coding a long time, so I will recognize my own files when I see them. I know my own coding style and commenting style. So they're there for you to use as a guide, but not as a coding template to copy and paste. Because I don't want to give students marks for work that's largely mine. I've also put in a sample project screenshots at the end of this document. I'll show you the live site. Please keep in mind, it's an example only. You can't build an exact replica of what's in the screenshots. You have to build something different. Okay, so the screenshots are only to give you a guide. And lastly, one other thing, I hate to say this, but unfortunately I have to. You can't change your files after Sunday the 13th at 11:59. Okay, or you can change them, but you're gonna get a late penalty if you do. So you shouldn't be changing your files on the server or changing anything on GitHub, and everything's timestamped. So if you change your files the next day, hoping to give yourself more time, I will be able to see that. So what are you going to build? Well, you get to choose. You can build anything you like. You're going to build a little 3-page web application that saves data and displays data. So you can build anything that is interesting to you, and I've given you some suggestions here. So build anything you like. You know, you like to cook, build a recipe tracker. You can never remember when your assignments are due, build a homework tracker where you can record all your assignments and then see them on a page. You like going to the gym, gyms are opening back up, you want to build a workout log so you can record your trips to the gym and what exercises you did. If that interests you, build that. You want to keep track of what TV shows you're streaming, what season and episode you're on. Doesn't matter to me. If you need help, a lot of students like getting to choose their own projects. Some students don't like this. Some students want to be told exactly what to do, and they have trouble coming up with an idea. If you're having trouble coming up with an idea, please email me, and we can have a conversation by email, and I'm happy to help you figure it out. For example, last semester I had a student who was having a lot of trouble, and he was an international student. And we chatted by email, and he came up with the idea that he was going to make a site about famous places in his home country. And that way he would teach the rest of the class a bit about his own country. And he was excited. He put a lot of time and effort in. He just needed a little guidance in picking an idea. Okay, so don't be stuck. If you're stuck, then please email me and I'll help you find a project idea that you're happy with. No, the CSS is not important at all. I mean, you do not have to use any CSS. You can, but I'm not, in this assignment, I'm not evaluating you on the CSS. I would recommend you use a little bit of CSS because every project you build, eventually, you should be building a portfolio of your work so you can show potential employers. So if you don't add any styles on, your projects won't look great. So for your own purposes, I would recommend you do at least some basic styling. But I'll go into the detailed requirements and the marks. Short answer is no. But yeah, the goal is basically to save data to the database and then show data from the database. So in your database, you'll use your existing AWS database. You don't create a new one. We don't have permissions to create new databases on AWS. So you just use the same one that we're using for our PHP Flicks application. So you're going to build two new tables in there that will be joined by a foreign key. So what those tables will be will depend on, what the subject is. So for example, in my sample application, I built two tables. I built a players table and a positions table. And they were joined by a foreign key, which was the position ID. Every player belonged to a position. I'll actually show you the sample site. The screenshots are in. So I built a page. So I have a form page. And here you can see the link between my tables. This form will save to the players table, and every player is attached to a position. So you're going to build a form, and your form must include a dropdown that is filled from the parent table. So again, I had a positions table that fills my dropdown. You have to validate the user input on the form. We're going to look at doing this today. So for example, if I try to save here, tells me again, I validated that the form is filled out properly. Okay, so we're going to add validation. When the form is filled out properly, you should save the form contents to the database like we did in lesson 2. So if I fill this out properly, and when I save, I'll get a message saying my record was saved, and now I have a link, and we can see that the record I've just added has been added to my table. So that's the whole project. There's 3 pages. There's a form, there's a save page, and there's a display page that shows the data in a table format. Okay, so I picked the little player database, my favorite soccer team. You have to pick something else. And then, my last page, I query the database and I output in an HTML table, and you'll add comments in your code. Yes, absolutely. Andres, we're going to use Bootstrap in class next week. We'll add it to our PHP Flicks, but you can definitely use a CSS framework like Bootstrap, Material Design, Pure CSS. For sure you can. That's a good idea. And we will, I did use Bootstrap here. Okay, so anytime I fill out my form, so right now I've got 5 players showing up. Anytime I fill out my form, I choose from my list, I save, and now my new record's added at the bottom. So that's how I'm going to test. It doesn't have to be the last line. You can put the drop down anywhere you want in the form, but it must be here. You must have a drop down list that's filled from a parent table. But it doesn't have to be the last line. You could put the drop down first or anywhere in your form. You will design the form in the way that you think makes sense. But it is compulsory to have one drop-down list where the data is filled from the table, okay? So the detailed requirement here, I've just detailed these exact same requirements a little bit more. You must upload your pages to AWS and use the AWS database. So you're going to include the link. And then you are going to commit your code to a private GitHub repository. You're going to invite me as a collaborator, and you must have at least 2 commits, and we'll talk a bit more. A commit is a version. So you don't just upload all the code to GitHub when you're done. The idea of working with Git and GitHub is we are regularly making commits or new versions as we're working. And this allows us to back up our changes to the cloud in case something happens to our computer. There also needs to be a Readme file, and we'll look at doing that today. So I'll explain what a few of these things mean for those of you who haven't worked with GitHub before. And we'll do them together in class today. So I'll show you briefly, but we'll actually do them later. So here's what I mean by a Readme file. It's a little document that describes the project. And the file name is readme.md. We'll build one of these today for our PHP Flicks site. And how you give me access in your repository once you've created it through the settings, and I've put this in the assignment document. You go to settings. Oh, they've changed the name again. It's under settings and collaborators. It'll ask you to confirm your password. And then under this manage access section, there's an add people. So when you click add, this is where you'll type in my GitHub username. So if I wanted to invite for example, Jarrett, who I know some of you had as an instructor. So I just click add, and GitHub will send him an email inviting him, giving him access to the repository. So you will do this, but you'll add my GitHub username, which I've put in here. So I've included screenshots of the little demo application that I've shown you. Here's the form with the drop down, the save page, and then a page that shows all of the data in our child table. So here's how to be graded. A couple marks for setting up your database tables properly. 8 marks for your form and save. 8 marks for querying of the data. So that's 4 marks for your filling your drop-down list and 4 marks for building your HTML table. There's 8 marks for validating on both the form and the save page that we've got correct data. A couple of marks for Git, a couple of marks for code commenting, up to 2 bonus marks for any additional PHP functionality where you can show me you've learned something new with PHP on your own. So this isn't for doing things with HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, something that shows you have learned some additional things about PHP that we haven't done in class. I'll give you up to 2 bonus marks. But if you do that. The feature has to be working. There's no part marks for this. So if you try something and it doesn't work, you don't get the bonus. For bonus, it's got to be whatever you attempt, it has to be complete and functional. Okay, so it's not a huge assignment. You have 2 weeks to do it. But as many of you probably found out with Lab 1, a lot of what we spend our time on is actually debugging. So make sure you start early to give yourself time to debug. There's one other thing I'll say about that, but I will open it up for questions first. Is there anything about the assignment you're not clear about, you'd like me to go over again, or requires more explanation? Floor is yours. Okay, well, we will spend some time today. And if by the end of class today Git isn't working for you, then what I would like you to do, because it's going to be critical, you're not going to be able to get through the course without Git. And it's okay that it takes a while, there's a learning curve. If you don't have Git working, then please book an office hours appointment. I've got 2 hours available tomorrow and 1 hour on Wednesday. So the booking link is on Blackboard. You can book a 15-minute appointment. Okay, so under faculty info, the booking link is right here to Calendly. So you can book an office hours appointment. Because Git, it will be required. It's something that we need to know, and you'll need to have working. And not only in my class, as you go through the program, a lot of your other instructors, if they haven't required Git already, they're going to. So if we don't get it working today, book a one-on-one appointment and I'll help you with that. Are there any other questions about the assignment? Yes, and I've put up, the LinkedIn Learning class is good. I also created a little Git tutorial here, which I'll show you later. We're not going to do it in class, but this is another tutorial on like using Git and GitHub from the beginning. I had to create it, created it a couple years ago when I was working on my master's degree. I had to do an assignment for an online teaching class. It was make an online tutorial or do something. So I'll show you this later. So there are some resources here. Yeah, the LinkedIn Learning class is a good idea. By the time you guys are done here, you will all be very comfortable with Git because we're just going to use it all the time. The one question that did come up over the weekend in talking to some students had emailed me about issues with Lab 1. So I will provide a little bit of advice about the debugging process. Some students emailed with error messages. So what should you do when you're working on assignment and you get an error? Here's the approach that I've found would be the most effective approach. Number one is pay attention carefully to the error message that you get. First of all, the error messages are often descriptive and they'll tell you what's wrong. So the first thing to do if you get an error message is copy and paste that error message and search online for it. And typically you can often find an answer within a very short time. You can also look directly on Stack Overflow, which is probably the best site here. So if you find something like PHP Access Denied, okay, so here I got an error. trying to access my local, right? Here's a really common error. So you'll see answers. First thing to do is look and see if you can find it. And spend a little time, because this is normal. We, even experienced programmers, we spend a lot of time debugging our own errors and searching online for solution. I've been doing this for 2 decades. I still do this every day. So we can often find a quick answer to our problem. I was doing a LinkedIn learning tutorial over the last week, trying to learn some new stuff. And some things were different in the tutorial when I tried them, and I spent lots of time on Stack Overflow having to debug stuff. So we have to try to develop our debugging skills by first searching on your own. If you still can't find an answer, then what do? The best thing to do is take a screenshot of the error, send it to me along, well, maybe with the file with your code, and then I can take a look at it. But first you want to try and find an answer online, because you might find an answer much more quickly. Yep, it happens, right? So yes, I will help you debug, but I'm not the first line of defense for debugging, right? Because we have to develop our debugging skills. So first you try and find the answer on your own. And if you can't, then send it to me. But the more information you give me, the easier, the faster I can help you. So somebody emailed me and said, this page doesn't work. Well, if you just say it doesn't work, it doesn't give me anything to go on to be able to help you. So if you have an error message you can't solve, send it to me and show me the code. Either take a screenshot or attach your file or share it via OneDrive or GitHub so that I can look at your code. Without being able to know what happened and see the code, it's very difficult to help you debug the solution. Okay, so when asking for help, try to provide as much info as you can, and that way I can help you more easily and more quickly. Yep. Well, Kushwinder, your code editor should be showing you this, right? When you forget a semicolon, we should see a red line in PHP Storm or WebStorm. So we also want to pay attention to those kind of warnings in our code editors. That will also save us some time. All right. So let's open up our application. So I'm going to start up my XAMPP server. I'll start my Apache server in my XAMPP control panel. I don't need MySQL running because we're going to use the AWS database. I don't need my local database. And I'm going to connect to the VPN so that we can access our AWS server. So once Apache is green and I'm connected to OpenVPN, I can open up Visual Studio Code and I'll open up the PHP Flix project. Our application is, I get confused between my two classes. I think we're doing PHP Flix, aren't we? PHP Tunes is my afternoon class. Oh, we're PHP Tunes, thank you. I get them confused. Yeah, okay, I thought so. Alessio, you're in the Lakehead section, right? Yes, Alessio, our class is this afternoon. Right. No problem. 5% off. You woke up for nothing. Sorry to hear that. Go back to bed. I'll see you at noon, Alessio, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, So we've got our PHP Flicks. I'm going to open it up here in the browser. So I'll just go to localhost, PHP. We have our kind of useless homepage right now. Let's maybe make a couple changes on our homepage so at least we can get a link to our movies list. So I'll close up all the files. Let's start on the homepage. I'm going to take out all this kind of junk we did here. We don't really need it. Let's just put on a link. Sorry, we'll put on a paragraph. We'll just say, building the site, Comp1006, using the LAMP stack. Check out our and now I'll make list of movies a link. So I'll add a link. So we're not putting any PHP on here. We're just trying to make the homepage a little bit useful. The old content we had on there was not very useful. We want kind of a functional homepage. So now we get a description of the website. And if I click list of movies, it now takes us to our HTML table that we built last week, queries the database, fetches out the current list. Let's add a simple link on here as well that says add a movie. So when we're looking at the main movie page, we have the ability to navigate to our movie details. We will add a navigation bar and CSS next week, which will take care of that. But just for today, I'll open my movies page as well. And right under the H1 here, we'll just add a link to movie details, and it can say add a new movie. So when we're looking at the list of movies, we now have a way we can navigate off to our form. So if I refresh, I've got a little link here now. So it'll jump us and take us over to the movie details. So we know that this form that we built 2 weeks ago, we know it works, right? We can add movies. It seems to work. I could go ahead and add. I save. And now my new movie shows up. So we know our form is working, but our form is missing any kind of validation. And this is a huge responsibility. It's not very difficult, but it's a huge responsibility. Whenever we build forms on web pages, we also are responsible to make sure we do a good job of validating the inputs. Why would that be so important? We've built a working form, but why does validation matter? We don't have any right now. Okay, Daniel says, so our data is accurate. Yep, that's true. Why else? What other kinds of things? Well, let's be more specific, I guess. What are some of the things on this page that we would want to check for specifically? In general, Daniel's right. We want the data to be accurate. Yeah, we want to check for security and also efficiency, right? So for example, character limits. If our movie title is only 100 characters in the database, we want to make sure the user doesn't enter in a 65,000 character. Okay, Tyler makes a good point, right? In release year, we might want to check the format so we don't get this. Yep. What other kinds of things do we want to check? So we want to check length. We might want to check the data type or the format of an input. What are some other common types? What are some other common types of validators that we see on web forms? Think about like a registration page. There's typically some other validation we might see on a registration form. Okay, yeah, that's right. So pretty much every form, we want to check for required fields. Yep. What about here? Let me see. What kind of things would we want to check here? An application we built last year in this course. So we want to make sure, yeah, the format of the email address, right? So I can't do this. What else would we want to check or validate? Yeah, we'd want to make sure, we'd want to compare the values of passwords. We might also want to check the format of the password, right? If I just put in, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we might want to check that it's at least 8 digits. We might also want to check the formatting. Yeah, we want to make sure the password values are duplicated. So we see this every day, right, as end user. Almost every time we go to a web form, there's a whole series of validation rules because we're trying to make sure that we get the data, our application gets the data that we want in the format we want from our users. So we've built our form here, but if I save right now, and it says movie saved, and now we get this, right? So now I've got blanks. My release here just defaults to 0 because we don't have any actual proper validation going on. So we want to be validating. Now there's two places that we can validate inputs. We want to validate them both on the client using HTML, and you would have learned a bit about this in your HTML fundamentals class. We also want to validate in our PHP code on our save page. So I'm going to open up both the movie details form and the save movie page. So we can add some validation to our form. Sorry, I need my movie details. So here's our form, our movie details, with our inputs. So how would we add validation directly in the form? For example, around title. What kind of validation might we want to add on line 12 of movie detail? where we've got this first input. Yeah, well, by default, it's going to be text. Yeah, we'll definitely want to make sure that it's required. So let's try that out. Right, on line 12, I can just add an HTML5, right? I can just add the required attribute. So I put that inside of my input tag. So if I refresh my form now, if I leave title blank and go to save, sure I save my changes here. Then HTML5, this required attribute, it now pops open this, please fill out this field. So I can't submit my form. Right? So the HTML5 is going to ensure that the only way I can submit is that there's something entered, some value entered in the title. So that seems like a good idea, right? We do want this. So this is our client-side validation. We're using HTML in our form, so that's working. Cool. I'm going to suggest this is not sufficient though, on its own. We should also be checking that the title is not empty in our save movie page as well. How come? Why would it be necessary to check before we go ahead and connect and save to the database? If I can't fill out the form, if I can't submit the form with an empty title, why would we also need to check it on the save page anyway? Doesn't that seem unnecessary? I will tell you it is necessary, but it doesn't seem like it. Okay, well, that's one good point, Viraj. Yeah, the required attribute, that's true. It doesn't take care of spaces. Yep, in SQL we have not null. But how could I save without a blank title? Right, my form won't let me. So in theory, my insert on my save page, this should never run, right? So it sort of looks like this is enough. Well, I'll ask the question this way. Is there any way for us to submit data directly to the save page without using our movie details form? Do you think that's possible? I would suggest it is. You're getting warmer, Belinda. We can actually use post, and I'll show you how. Well, we could insert directly in Workbench, yes, if we had the database connection. That's true, Sarah. But we would need the database credentials. That's true. We can use, there are all kinds of HTTP tools that we use, mostly for testing APIs, which we'll look at later in the semester. But I can go to a website like this one. We'll use this tool later on. There's a site called Hopscotch Io. This lets me make HTTP requests to a remote, to any URL. So for example, let me show you how this works. So here's a test API I could use. So if I put in that URL and make a GET, I can make an HTTP call in my browser and fetch a bunch of JSON data. Okay, what does this have to do with our form? Well, let's say I make my URL this, localhost, phpflix, save movie.php, and I make my request a post request. And I'm going to send in as my, I'm going to send it in with no body. This is going to let me make an HTTP call directly to the save page without using our form. So when I submit this, well, I get this, okay, but here I can do it this way. That's with the content type. If I do it this way, I'll do my form this way. So I put in title and leave value out, rating, so I can submit the fields. Release year, I'll say ABC. So I'll submit these values, but title is empty. And now I submit and I get a response that says movie saved. Yeah, it is. You can see how risky this is. So yes, I have a required attribute here, but I've just submitted without using my form. So now if I go back to movie details, right, I've got all these blanks. So yes, we want to add HTML5 validators in our forms, but we also need to validate the fields on the server. Okay. So let's add, I'm going to leave this required attribute here for now, but we also want to add validation into our save page that we'll check. So let's go to save. We're going to leave this block of code here that captures our 4 inputs. But now we want to check before we connect to the database and do all this code of saving and showing a message. We need to do our input validation check. Must have no errors before saving. So we know that the title needs to be required, right? So we can say, we use a PHP and if statement. So we can say if not empty. PHP is a function called empty, and that exclamation mark means not. If not empty, we'll check. If it is empty, what should we do if the title is empty? So we grab the title from the form. Okay, yes, we don't want to insert. Yeah, I agree. Masa, yeah, we want to show a message, and as Sarah said, we want to say, don't allow any submissions. So first we'll just say, let's print out a message. Title is required. And we'll put on an HTML line break, because we might have multiple errors. So we'll print each error on a new line. We also want to check the rating. And again, if rating is empty, so both of these fields are required. Now, I always recommend we check each field individually, because our forms are often big and we want very specific error messages. So yes, you could check all the fields and all the rules in one long if statement, if this or this or this or this or this. But it's best practice to validate each field individually for its specific requirements, and that way we can show a very specific error. Now, release year, we actually should check two things about the release year. Or maybe more. What things should we check about the release year? Okay, yeah, we want to check it's 4 digits. We want to check that it's numeric. Yep, we don't want it to contain letters, and we also want to make sure it's not empty. So we'll have a few checks. So the first thing we want to check, if it's empty, again, we'll say that it's required. We could then use an else statement. So if it's not empty, we have a release year. We then want to check that it's a numeric format. And PHP has a built-in function called isNumeric. So we'll say if not, oh, actually, sorry, it's like JavaScript. We can say if it's not a number, so if release year is not a number, and then I want to add a third check. I want to make sure if release year is a number, we'll just want to check that maybe it's greater than, let's say, 1900. I don't know we really had any movies before 1900. So one more check. If So we've got a really simple rule for title and rating, but we've got 3 different validation checks on the year. That it's not empty. If it's not empty, that it is a number. And if it is a number, that it's 1900 or greater. Now, we're doing all this checking, and we'd be showing error messages. I'll just save my code. Well, Daniel, we could check that it's less than the current year, but that would prevent us, for example, from entering movies that are upcoming. Right? We know a movie is going to be released next year. Maybe we want to be able to enter it in our database. But if you wanted to add that check, it certainly wouldn't be wrong. So this is a case of when we're writing our validation rules, we need to know, we might often have to talk to our client and ask them what the rules are. Right? Client, that would be a great question for our client who's paying us to build this site. Will you allow us to put upcoming releases in, yes or no? So let's try this out. I'll just go ahead and play around with this. So I'll go back, I'll add a new movie. I have to put in a title. We know I have to because I've got my HTML5 validator. I'll just leave the rest of it blank. And now I get rating required, release year required. Now it still says movie saved. We'll deal with that after we take a break. It's gonna insert some junk. If I put in a release year of say 80, now it says my release year must be greater than 1900. Or if I put in ABC, it should tell me my release year has to be. Okay, we'll have to fix that. Is none is not. We have to give it a number, so that didn't quite. Okay. All right, well, you know what? Let's take a pause here. We're gonna have to do, it's not quite complete. We're getting there. Still saving all this junk, which we'll clean out later. So we're getting there, but let's take a pause here. We'll come back, we'll finish up with this. We don't have too much more to do. I'll take a pause. I will upload what we've done so far to GitHub, but we'll have to keep working on it. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here. We'll come back at 9:07.